Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode for my writing podcast. Thank you for joining me. If you haven't watched the first two videos that I posted, the first one an introductory one, and the second one a November writing update, as well as some future plans involved, please go ahead and watch those. I think they'd be very helpful for you just to get an understanding of who I am and what I'm doing with this channel and where I'm at with my writing process. In this video, I want to discuss a little bit about ideas, specifically where ideas have kind of developed in my writing process and skill over the years. I'll be giving a broad overview of how I've kind of seen ideas and today where I get my ideas from and generally how I develop them. I'm pretty sure I'll be making several more episodes in the future about my ideas. There's just a broad range of topics that you can discuss about it, but this one will at least give a little overview to help you understand my writing process a little bit better. When someone thinks of ideas, there's a few different things that come to mind. You could think of any thought that could be put into story form. So an idea could be anything from something that pops in your head, like a frog or a TV or then a desk chair, then just ideas just float around and can be used. It's nothing really super special. And I guess that's kind of one layer of it. Another idea, which is kind of more common to talk about, a little bit more intriguing, is something original that pops in your head. Maybe it doesn't pop in your head, but develops over time. Those obviously are a lot more rare than just thinking about random things. So that creates an interesting discussion to come up with something wholly original, very difficult to do. And then the third way that I've kind of already touched about is a slow development of something familiar that you know that transitions into something a little bit more unfamiliar or original. I think that's kind of what I want to talk about most in this one because thinking about random things that you can just throw in a book isn't that exciting. Thinking about original ideas is exciting, but it's hard to say when you actually have an original idea. I think it'd be hard to kind of pinpoint where that is. We can see things famously in media, whether it's movies or books, that could be argued are very original, such as Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. And there's a few others out there, of course. There's probably several others, but it's very difficult to come up with an idea that can be considered wholly original. So I'll be talking more or less on the third point, thinking of an idea that can be a little bit more familiar and moves increasingly to the unfamiliar and a little bit unique to how you want to shape it for your story. So, starting out, I'm going to go way back to when I was first writing. Obviously, it's not super relevant for today, but I think it's just something interesting to cover on how you think about ideas developing through your writing process, especially if you started writing when you were younger. If you did, you can probably relate to this a lot. And even if you were older and started getting into writing then, you can probably relate to it at least a little bit. So, starting out, your ideas depending on where you're at, can a lot replicate what you know and what you've read, which isn't a bad thing for developing. So, for instance, Lord of the Rings and Thomas Covenant is what I grew up on for reading. It didn't just influence my childhood and teen writing, they basically were my writing. One of the first serious stories that I wrote, I put serious kind of in air quotes there because, well, I'll tell you about it. So, one of the first serious stories that I wrote as a young teen had an old wizard as one of the main characters. He did have 12 dwarves that followed him. Now, there was no ring, and the dwarves did die very early on. So, that was different from the story that I quite obviously took from The Hobbit. Um, in fact, in this slight example, you can see where in storytelling, even though we may replicate what others have done, there's still a desire to make it different and unique to our own. So again, obviously ripping off from The Hobbit there, having a wizard with a beard and a hat and all that, and he had dwarves following him. But even when I don't know when I wrote that, around 12 years old, I guess, even with ripping off that idea there, I still wanted to do something different with it and exciting, and I had the dwarves die. So that's kind of a first step, is taking what you know and trying to twist it a little bit to make it your own. I guess the next step after that of exactly mimicking stories that you're familiar with is making them your own, but still mimicking the general structure of a story. So I'll give you an example. Let's say if I wrote a book that started with, let's just say, a small boy named Frodo who found a mysterious jewel and was being chased by tall, dark creatures who wore hoods. There's obviously some problems there. Plagiarism, I guess, would be on that list, but stealing someone's idea, really not making it your own at all. If, though, let's say I thought of a strong older teen, maybe who's definitely into adulthood or coming into it, who's about to leave home. He's grown up on a farm his whole life, and that's where he's destined to stay. Perchance, though, marauders ransack his village, and just before dying, his father gives him a magical sword. Though he doesn't know it at the time, he has to discover that along the way. And his father gives him one word, the name of a place for which he should seek out. Now, this is different from Lord of the Rings, of course, but generally the same ideas are in place. The same character is in a farmland area, some crazy events take place, maybe a little bit more traumatic than the beginning of Lord of the Rings with his father dying before him. But the character is also handed a magical item with instructions on where to go with it. So this sort of next step, moving away from directly copying ideas you are familiar with to making them slightly your own, is kind of where I was at in my process, maybe middle to late teenage years, where I knew to follow general story structures, but I didn't know how to make any of my own yet, and I didn't quite have any unique ideas. It was twisting ones I'd seen before, which again, there's nothing really wrong with. You're developing your writing as you go along. So that's kind of the next step where my writing took me. And again, this isn't necessarily a step 1, step 2, step 3 process on how you should develop your ideas. I'm mostly giving you a background on how I came into it since I started writing so young. Again, if you started writing maybe when you were in college or didn't start writing fiction until later on, your experience might be vastly different. But I think just because I've kind of covered the broad spectrum of things, I think that it's just worth sharing to kind of show all the stages that you could go through into developing your own ideas. The big leap is when you really come to realize you have ideas of your own that are, if not entirely original enough to put a spin on the normal formula and take people, including yourself, by surprise. For example, while building my world and the stories I'm going to tell within the world, there are some generals that aren't entirely original. Sometimes it's impossible or close to it. For example, how the universe came to be in your epic fantasy. I'm thinking mostly the Silmarillion, talking about the creation of everything or so. There's only so many possibilities, at least I think there are, or maybe close to it. But it's how you make a spin on it that gives it your own kind of personal flavor that really matters. I can't provide specifics about the origin of my universe and worlds and everything, because that would be very spoilery this early on. But over a period of several years since I was a teen, I've developed and grown my world and the characters and the stories in it. So I believe it's a setting in a relatively original state, if not wholly, then at least in certain parts, and enough to give it its own unique twist. Okay, down to the actual storytelling of the book that you want to write, or that, from my perspective, that I am writing right now. There's so many things to cover relating to story ideas. I can't obviously possibly fit them all in this one podcast, so I will spread them out. But simply, though, as I can make of it, I expect my ideas to come from a variety of observations and places. A core element in my first book actually came from a dream I had. I had already built the foundation to the setting and the characters, but there was one core magical element that I wanted to fit not only within this book, but also that would relate to my other books and the magic system I want to create. And so, again, it kind of came to me in a dream. If you don't keep a dream journal or don't have a note section in your phones, and it's something that is very nice to keep handy. I know sometimes too, kind of on the side, sometimes I'll wake up and I'll think something is really funny, whether it's a joke that came to me or a situation in a dream, I'll write it down. Most of the time it's not funny by the time I come to the next morning, but at least it's handy to have. So I encourage everyone to keep some sort of dream journal. Now, the dream I had was not a revelation like Lucas says with Star Wars. I did not dream up everything and had this aha moment. This is going to make me super successful. It wasn't like that. So when I say I had an idea in a dream, I mean, I already had the core fundamentals laying down. I was already thinking about it a lot. So in a way, it's almost no surprise. It kind of popped up in a dream to connect all those elements together. But when it did pop up, I thought on it a lot, and I progressed the idea that I had from my dream and continued to grow it and see how it would fit within my world. And that's kind of how I develop my ideas from everywhere. I doubt I'll have another dream idea like that, but who knows? But there's things in our real world that I try to think about and try to make them fantastic in a way to see how they could maybe fit in a book or in a story. For example, you can take pretty much anything. Let's take a tree, for instance. I may be thinking of a tree and then just kind of feeling amazed at how big some of them are that I walk by. And then I think, well, what if there was no limit to how big a tree could get? Or what if trees grew so big that at a certain point after so many years it started to get maybe disease for some reason and no one knew why? And if it did get to that point, maybe it would start to disease the surrounding land. I'm thinking obviously in a fantasy style now, but you can kind of see how ideas can develop just by thinking about normal things around the world, whether it be plants, animals, human interactions, and just developing those ideas. I've found that the more interesting ideas that I have come from just simple thought, thinking of one thing continuously and just trying to develop and move it in different ways, testing it out to see how it would fit and work. And that's usually when I have my very few, but my aha moments when I'm writing. It's not that I'm sitting there just kind of randomly or lazily thinking and then boom, a thought pops in my head and I have it. It's much more I'm thinking of something, trying to see how characters could react differently to a story element or some other situation, and then I get to thinking about something cool that could happen. That's when an idea kind of, I don't want to say pops in my head because you're progressing it in your mind anyway. And then once you think of that core element, you have that in place and then more will pop up. And it's really exciting to see a book and a story in your world, the magic system come together when you just keep developing these thoughts by thinking on one thing continuously. So that's my thoughts on ideas, at least for right now. I know I'll have more episodes in the future tackling ideas, but and that gives a good and fun overview of my personal journey of how I've developed ideas over the years, where I started out and where I am now. I'm definitely not mimicking stories at this point. At least I hope I am not. I feel like I've gotten to the point where coming up with my own ideas is something that's been going on for quite a while. So I'm excited to see them fleshed out. I'm excited to write my stories and books for all of you to read and enjoy and see those ideas come to life. If you haven't already, please like this video, please comment, share the video, definitely subscribe if you haven't. Please visit my website. I'll make that link in the description. On there you can contact me. We can talk about anything that's on your mind. I'd love to join a chat with you and talk about whatever you want to. Also on my website, you can sign up for my newsletter. I'll be sending that out infrequently, but when I do, it'll be for important announcements or big updates, and then especially to give you free content when it's available. I have some fun ideas I want to do with that I'll share in the future, but please go ahead and sign up for that. I appreciate your support. Continue to watch, continue to like, and I will see you next time.